Hello and welcome. In this video, I wanted to take a look at a very interesting Necron list, similar to one I wanted to take a look at a while back. This list makes heavy utilization of the super heavy slot, and unfortunately I never quite got around to the last list, so it's very exciting to see a new list like this pop up and still be successful within the current meta. This list placed second place out of 86 players and was played by a player named Corey Scholes. And the tournament that this list was played in was called the Gateway Open Grand Tournament. This tournament was held on August 20th in Illinois, USA. So with that being said, let's dive right into the list. This list is composed of a patrol detachment and a super heavy detachment. For both detachments, as required in the Nephilim rules, each detachment must be of the same sub-faction, in this case being a dynasty. However, this list does not go for the normal dynasty choice of the custom dynasty that gives you objectives secured. Rather, it has chosen to go for Mefrit, which is rather cool to see, as all of a sudden we've seen Mefrit, Novak, and the custom dynasties do rather well within tournament play. We've even seen some Zerakin dynasty do alright as well, so while there is not a ton of versatility, there are a few different options you can go with within tournament play, depending on what kind of list you want to build. And while I have an entire video that I'll link in the description below for the different dynasties of the Necrons, let's give a quick rundown of the universal benefits of the Mefrit dynasty. The first benefit that it gives is all ranged weapons except for pistol weapons gain an additional 3 inches to the range, which is always a nice ability to have. In addition to that, they gain an additional point of armor penetration when firing within half range, and the protocol benefit, which is much more important nowadays, is the Vengeful Stars, which adds 1 armor penetration on unmodified wound rolls of 6, and enemies do not receive cover benefits when within half range of the ranged weapon targeting them. These are all very nice abilities, and don't forget that the stratagem for the Mefrit dynasty is rather good as well. In any case, that's just what the dynasty offers, and it's nice to see that it can break out into tournament play. With that being said, let's begin by looking at the patrol detachment. As all patrol detachments do, this patrol detachment begins with its HQ choice. The HQ choice in this case is the all-popular Chronomancer. The Chronomancer has been given the Aeon Stave in order to keep his points cost rather low, and he has been given a relic, which is the Veil of Darkness. The Veil of Darkness is a great relic, and you'll see that even in a list such as this, which doesn't have too many amazing targets for it, it's still rather powerful as it allows you to position very effectively and gives you a lot of options in terms of how you use it. So even when you don't have the biggest selection of different units to target with it, it still actually has quite a lot of applications and should never be discounted in most situations, considering that the opportunity cost for bringing it within a list is rather minimal indeed. In any case, that covers HQ choices for this patrol detachment. Moving on to troop choices, the patrol detachment utilizes a minimal size unit of 5 immortals being armed with Gauss weapons. In this situation, this is the cheapest troop choice you can bring within an army, and it's one that's rather effective, so it's definitely one that a lot of lists like this will utilize. In any case, it's nice to see that the immortals have a bit of a home now, whereas before they kinda didn't see play, though they did see a major rise within the last 2 chapter approved editions, and it seems like they've kind of overtaken the Necron Warriors. However, from time to time, we do still see Necron Warriors within different lists, and it's interesting to see how the 2 different units are utilized. Continuing on, we come to an elite choice, and in this case, the elite choice is a bit different than in most other lists as well. Normally what we see with the Necron forces is something like Scorpic Destroyers or other heavy melee choices within the elite slot. However, this list has chosen to go with something radically different, and has brought 2 units of 10 Death Marks. The Death Marks are not particularly an impressive unit in themselves, however, I do think they have a bit of a place in the game, and I stand by what I said about them in the past, and that they're a great choice for a unit that you can put on an objective, perform an action with, and then have them provide some fire support for your other units across the battlefield due to their long range and decent enough damage. I don't think they're a particularly great sniping unit for taking out characters, and I don't think they're the best unit in terms of shooting within the Necron forces, as there are plenty of better choices. However, I do think they're an interesting enough unit that you can position rather effectively across the battlefield, and they have enough utility that they're actually a bit deceptive in how good they can be in certain situations. With that being said, do keep in mind that you can definitely replace these Death Marks with other choices and be just as successful, though I do think the biggest thing that they contribute within a list like this is that they actually can sit on objectives and provide that fire support as mentioned before, considering that this list is going to be very heavy on very few units. So it does really benefit from having a unit that can sit on an objective and still provide some kind of output within the game. So the Death Marks do fit a unique role within this list specifically, and I do think their inclusion is rather interesting, so it does show there's kind of a lot of room to play around with some unit choices depending on how you build your list within a Necron army. Following the elite choice, we come to the fast attack choice, which is once again kind of an objective claiming unit, in this case being 3 Scare bases. The Scarabs are a perfectly good unit for objective gathering purposes, as they're a rather low profile unit that has enough ability to hide behind terrain and can be rather mobile as well as rather annoying for a lot of opponents to handle, so they do provide that utility and they've been showing up within lists quite commonly, especially now that the Crypto Thralls are a little bit weaker, and as such, the Scarabs have kind of reclaimed their position as being the dominant objective unit within the Necron forces. I do like the split between the Scarabs and the Deathmarks as they perform rather different functions within a list, and both of them have different pros and cons with the function that they bring to the army list as a whole. Finally, continuing on with our first patrol detachment, we come to a rather unique choice for this patrol detachment, the one that I've been seeing pop up a little more within different army lists for the Necron forces. In this case, instead of the heavy support slot, this list included 2 flyer choices to complete its patrol detachment. The flyer choices in this case are 2 Doom Scythes. The Doom Scythe has definitely seen a lot of upgrade throughout the 9th edition as it has gone from 200 points to 165 points for the model. This is a rather big decrease for the model, considering that across the 2 Doom Scythes included in this list, you save a total of 70 points. That's enough to definitely bring another unit within this army list, and it really shows how kind of heavily costed some of the Necron units were when the 9th edition came out, though it has played within their favor as it gave them a lot of room to have their units improved by points drops without making you have to take a ton of extra models. And one other thing I want to mention about the Doom Scythe is that this isn't the only list that I saw within, as I saw a couple other lists that included 1 or 2 Doom Scythes within recent tournament play. I think part of that has to do with the fact that it's not only cheaper in points now, but the weapon on it is actually better than I assumed, because I assumed it was a similar weapon to the Doomstalker or the Doomsday Arc. However, the Doom Scythe weapon is actually a bit different, because while it has a secondary fire system, being 10 Tesla shots, which are rather unimpressive, the primary weapon that it has is the Heavy Death Ray, and the Heavy Death Ray has a 36-inch range with 3 heavy shots, a strength of 12, 4 armor penetration, and D3 plus 3 damage. This means that the Heavy Death Ray is going to have less shots on average than the Doomsday Arc or the Doomstalker, because the Doomsday Arc and the Doomstalker will on average have 3.5 shots in comparison to 3 shots, though throughout the course of the game it can be much more or much less depending on how lucky you are with your rolls. That being said though, the big thing to keep in mind is that the D6 damage on those weapons is definitely going to provide much less consistency and much less output per hit and wound than the Heavy Death Ray, which has that consistent D3 plus 3, which is a very important damage characteristic that we've seen within other armies, and I think that's something that the Doomsday Arc and the Doomstalker really lack, and would really benefit by having their damage profiles change as such. Don't forget that this is also a consistent weapon, and there's no low power or high power mode depending on if the Doom Scythe moved or not, so it definitely has that benefit as well, and has a generally higher strength and armor penetration characteristic. Not only that, but do consider that the Doom Scythe as a flying unit is going to have a much better vantage point when shooting at different targets, and as such can get vision on priority targets better and more effectively than something like the Doomsday Arc or the Doomstalker. And the mobility it has, being a flyer, definitely helps in that sense as well. In any case, I do think the Doom Scythe is something that we're probably going to see more of, and I think it's an underrated unit within the Necron forces at its current point cost, as it does seem much more powerful than it did at first glance when I first looked at it at a 200 point value. So as such, I do think it's something you should start considering a little more within your different Necron forces than you did before, and I do think it's something that adds value to the combat patrol box, especially now that we're seeing more Immortals and more Deathmarks seeing play, as well as Tomb Blades getting some popularity as well. I do think the combat patrol as such has gone from kind of a mediocre purchase to a purchase that's much more interesting and much more exciting than it was when it was initially released. And that pretty much covers the patrol detachment of this army list. I do think that while the patrol detachment isn't the most interesting part of the list, I do think there's a ton of interesting stuff going on within it, as the Deathmarks and the Doom Scythes are not particularly the most common inclusions, even though they are seeing more and more play. So with that being said, I think we can move on to the Super Heavy detachment, where most of the interesting stuff is going to be happening. The Super Heavy detachment begins with a very obvious choice, that being the Silent King, who is an absolute beast and we've covered in the past in many different occasions. So I won't dwell on him too much, but do remember that he has gotten better going into the Nephilim Chapter Approved Edition, and he still retains an incredibly powerful spot within Necron forces. It's very uncommon to see a list nowadays that forgoes the Silent King, as he just brings so much to the table that he's a very valuable inclusion to any kind of build. That being said, there are certain situations in which a list will forgo the Silent King and bring other types of units to the table, though those situations are much more rare and niche in nature, and it really comes down to if you want to build that kind of army, or if you want to have a more traditional Necron army that includes such a powerful unit. Now, outside of the Silent King, this super heavy detachment includes two other choices. The first of those choices being a Necron monolith. The monolith is not the strongest vehicle in the world, though it did see a points reduction from 360 points to 300 points, which makes it a lot easier to include within a list like this. I do think the nice thing about a monolith is it has a rather big footprint, has a decent enough durability, and can actually put out quite a decent amount of firepower. In terms of firepower, in this case the monolith has been armed with 4 death rays instead of its normal weapons. Those 4 death rays each have a range of 24 inches, 1 heavy shot at a strength of 9, 3 armor penetration, and once again a damage profile of D3 plus 3. This means the monolith is actually putting out 4 rather heavy hitting shots, and on top of that damage profile it also has the particle whip, which has a 36-inch range, heavy D6 shots, a strength of 12, 3 armor penetration, and 3 damage, but it is a blast weapon so it cannot be used within close combat. And in total on average, that gives it 7 to 8 rather heavy hitting shots, and when you compare that to a unit of 4 Iron Striders within an army such as Adeptus Mechanicus, the points value of 300 points does not seem that bad. I do think that at the new points value, the monolith does have more room to see play, though I do think it's still a rather heavy commitment, and once again the Necrons have enough diversity within their different army builds to find different options than the monolith itself, which can be specifically targeted and locked down a little more efficiently than some other choices. Though once again, it does really come down to preference, and I do think the monolith does have room to run within a Necron force. As for the third and final super heavy choice, the previous list that I looked at back in the past used a Forge World model being a Necron Gargantuan construct, though in this situation, this list has chosen to go with a more standard model. In this situation, this list included a Tesseract Vault. And just like the monolith and Doom Scythe within the list, this model has also seen probably the most drastic points increase out of all 3, considering that the Tesseract Vault went from 500 points on release to 400 points in its current iteration. For most purposes, the Tesseract Vault functions as 2 different Catan units, so you can definitely opt to include 2 Catans instead of a Tesseract Vault. However, if you do choose to go that route, you will be required to include multiple detachments outside of the super heavy detachment. Though that being said, many lists have made use of multiple detachments to include multiple Catan units within different Necron armies. The reason for this being is that the relics and traits for the Necron forces are not particularly the most impressive, and several of the units within the Necron army do have abilities that rival those traits and relics as it is, such units being the Catan Shards, which do make you kind of break even in terms of the command points you spend in order to include them within an army list. In either case, let's take a look at what the Tesseract Vault does, as the Tesseract Vault comes with 4 Tesla spheres, each of those Tesla spheres having 24 inches of range, with an Assault 4 profile, which means that in total the Tesseract Vault gets 16 shots. These Tesla spheres have a strength of 7, 0 armor penetration, and 1 damage total. They do score double hits on unmodified hit rolls of 6, however do keep in mind because you are in the Nephrit dynasty, you do gain a little bit of that armor penetration on those Tesla spheres, which does make them a little more valuable than they would be within other dynasty choices within the Necron army. I do think that the Tesla spheres are generally a rather weak shooting profile, though that being said, they do help clean out swarms, and that's something that this list is going to struggle with considering that it has that incredibly heavy output with the Doom Scythe and the Monolith, as well as the Silent King, so having a little bit of ability to clean out swarms is definitely a nice benefit to have. In addition to firepower, the Tesseract Vault comes with quite a good array of Catan powers. The Tesseract Vault knows 4 different powers and can cast up to 3 of them within a turn when it has 16 or more wounds. This does decay over time because when it reaches half wounds at 15 wounds, it goes down to being able to cast only 2 powers, and once it reaches 8 wounds or less, it can only cast 1 power. This means that as the Tesseract Vault gets damaged, it does lose its ability to cast its different Catan powers. However, with this trade-off in mind, you can get quite a lot of powers off early in the game, and do keep in mind that the Tesseract Vault gets different benefits to its different powers for being Tesseract Vault instead of a Catan Shard. So there is definitely benefit to taking a Tesseract Vault over 2 different Catan Shards, as the Tesseract Vault does get certain benefits for being itself, and the points value is so low that it's actually a lucrative choice to take in place of those 2 Catan Shards. And with the points value in mind, the Tesseract Vault is a rather lucrative choice and can actually be lower in points than any 2 Catan Shards when chosen individually, so there's definitely more consideration on that end as well. Let's take a look at the different Catan powers that this Tesseract Vault has been given. The first of those Catan powers that the Tesseract Vault has is the Antimatter Meteor. The Antimatter Meteor lets you roll a d6 and you add 1 to the result for it being a Tesseract Vault, and on a roll of 3 to 5, the closest enemy unit that is visible within 24 inches of the Tesseract Vault suffers 3 mortal wounds automatically. if you happen to roll a result of 6+, you deal D3 plus 3 mortal wounds instead. That can actually add up rather quickly, and do remember because it's a Tesseract Vault, you only have to roll a 5 on a D6 in order to generate those additional mortal wounds. In addition to that being a Tesseract Vault, the only way you fail to inflict those mortal wounds is if you happen to roll a 1, considering you need a 2+ in order to get the 3 mortal wounds, making this a rather powerful and impressive smite ability. Moving on to a second Catan power, the second power is Time's Arrow. This Catan power allows you to select an enemy unit that is visible and within 18 inches, and you roll a d6, adding a 1 to the result because this is a Tesseract Vault, and if your roll is higher than any wounds characteristic of any models within that unit, a model is destroyed within that unit automatically. This means you can actually pick off rather durable models rather easily, as it just destroys the model outright, and they do not get any save against this ability. This is definitely an interesting power, and the additional point from the Tesseract Vault does make it all the more consistent. There are going to be certain games where you don't want to use this power at all, and there are going to be other games where this power is absolutely crucial to your game plan as a whole. I do think it's interesting, and I do like its inclusion within this list. The third Catan power that the Tesseract Vault has in this situation is the Sky of Falling Stars, and this is a great anti-swarm ability, considering it allows you to select up to 3 enemy units within 24 inches of the Tesseract Vault, and you roll a d6 for each unit, and if the roll is less than the number of models within the unit, that unit automatically suffers 3 mortal wounds instead of any variable amount because this is a Tesseract Vault. This means you can deal up to 9 mortal wounds with this ability within a single turn. Even though those wounds are going to be spread out and are usually going to be targeting larger squad sizes, this definitely is a powerful ability. And don't forget, you can still target smaller units and still be successful because if you roll low enough, you're still going to get those mortal wounds regardless of the size of the squad, and this can definitely put out quite enough damage to swing certain games in your favor. I do think the Sky of Falling Stars is very much a powerful ability, and don't forget the base of the Tesseract Vault is rather large, so it gives you even more coverage when selecting those 3 different units within 24 inches. The last and final Catan power that the Tesseract Vault has is the Transdimensional Thunderbolt. The Transdimensional Thunderbolt allows you to select a visible enemy within 24 inches, you roll a d6, and on a 2+, that enemy unit suffers d3 mortal wounds. In addition to that, enemy units within 6 inches instead of 3 inches, because this is a Tesseract Vault, suffer 1 mortal wound on a roll of 4+. Do keep in mind though, this ability cannot select characters with 9 or less wounds that are within 3 inches of another enemy unit unless that unit is the closest visible unit to the Tesseract Vault. This is definitely an interesting ability as it lets you deal some mortal wounds to a specific unit and then splash some additional damage if there are additional units close by, and the extended range on that splash damage is definitely very powerful on the Tesseract Vault. I do think all 4 of these Catan powers have their place within the game, and in most situations you'll find 3 good powers to cast within a turn, regardless of what kind of army you're playing against, so you're definitely going to have a lot of different options when utilizing the Tesseract Vault. I also think it's durable enough and has enough output at a low enough points cost that it's something people should start considering more, and I do think the points reduction on a lot of these super heavy units have given them a lot more life and a lot more optionality and ability to see play within different Necron armies, as they're definitely much more interesting than they were originally, and they're definitely a lot more comparable to other units within other factions now that they have that lower points cost in terms of how much output and durability they do have. I would like to say that there is some issues with this list, because this list really does play like a Titan list and not necessarily like a traditional Necron list. The nice thing about this is you can catch certain opponents off guard if they're not expecting this kind of army. Though on the other hand, if they're expecting an army like this and do know how to play against it, they can definitely take you on a lot easier than certain other Necron builds, considering the limited number of units you have within this army, and you're going to have a rather limited board presence considering you have 3 Lords of War and 2 Flyers. That being said, the other issue is, with Imperial Knight style armies being popular within the meta, this list does lose a little bit of its power and a little bit of its surprise factor. In addition to that, don't forget the Chaos Demons are coming in the near future, and they tend to have a Titan style of army of play, so that does hurt this list a little bit as well. That being said, the nice thing about this list is that you can build a rather traditional style of Necron army, and then slowly add models to it over time so that you have a little more optionality in terms of what kind of list you build, considering that most Necron units are playable within the Nephilim chapter approved. And I think that's the big thing about Necrons that has been very good within 9th edition, because even though they had periods where they were a bit of a weaker army, the different changes that they've experienced throughout the 9th edition rules has definitely given them a lot more life and has definitely given a lot of their different units the ability to see play on the tabletop. And at this time, I think I've seen different lists, including all of the different Catan shards and all of the different choices within the Necron forces to some success. There are obviously going to be some exclusions to this rule. However, I do think the vast majority of the Necron Codex is playable, which is a rather good spot for an army like this to be in, and I do think the Necrons have some of the best diversity within the game currently. In any case, leave a comment down below letting me know if you like this kind of army, and if you think it's one that you would be interested in playing, or if you prefer a more traditional style of Necron army. If you don't like either in that situation, do let me know what kind of Necron army you would like to play in the future. Anyways, as always, thank you for watching, and as always, I want to give a big shout out to my patrons. You guys are really awesome people and really do help support the channel. In addition to that, I would like to say, if you know anyone who may benefit from this content, please do share this video with them, as it not only helps the channel, but it also helps them out as well. And if you've enjoyed the content, do subscribe and like for future videos from this channel. Thank you for watching and have a great day. Bye.